The engine coughed once, shook the whole cab, and quit. After that, there was just sleet on the windshield. Evan Ward turned the key again. The dash lights came up, dimmed, and quit on him. Behind the cab, strapped down and shrink-wrapped since 6 o'clock the previous evening, sat a little over $8,000 of anchors, rebar ties, and framing hardware. He'd picked all of it up on will call before the suppliers locked their gates, because the whole point of the company was that nothing waited for a store to open. His phone buzzed in the cup holder, then again, then it stopped bothering with pauses. 14 men were already at the first site on Rayburn, standing around a job box with their hands jammed under their arms. If that material didn't land before 6, the contractor would be paying every one of them to watch their own breath. A second text came in. No greeting, no punctuation. We bet the day on you, man. Evan looked at the clock. 48 minutes. 4th and Mercer was 11 miles from the Rayburn site on a clear morning. In sleet, with traffic beginning to wake up, it might as well have been across town. He knew what was in the business account, down to the dollar, because he'd checked it at 11 the night before. 1,900 and change. Payroll ran Friday. The old pickup wasn't a backup. Jaden, his only other driver, was already 22 miles west, the bed loaded to the rails for a route that had started at 5:30. The pulling him off, it might save Rayburn, but it would strand 2 other crews before they even clocked in. Evan got out into the sleet, popped the service panel, checked the battery terminals and the fuel shutoff the way a man who'd worked a loading dock for 6 years knew to do, and found nothing he could fix with a flashlight and cold hands. Waking up early wasn't going to save him this morning. To understand how a receiving clerk ended up alone at an intersection with 3 crews' entire workday sitting behind him, we go back 18 months. 7:30 to 5. Mason Building Supply, out past the rail spur on the east side. Evan unloaded flatbeds. He counted the inventory nobody else volunteered to count. He handled short shipments, which mostly meant standing at the counter, while a contractor told him exactly what he thought of a warehouse that couldn't fill a simple order. He took overtime every time it was offered, and it was offered often, because everyone knew Evan said yes. 6 years in, and the only thing that had changed was which forklift they assigned him. When the supervisor slot opened, it went to a guy from the North Branch with a management certificate. Evan didn't argue. He'd also never once asked for the job. He'd been raised on the idea that if you keep your head down and work like a mule, sooner or later somebody upstairs notices. Nobody noticed. $2,450 a month after tax. Rent and utilities took $1,500 of it. Then the payment on the old pickup, a credit card he'd been feeding minimums since a root canal 2 winters back, and his mother's prescriptions. Linda was 58. Her knuckles had gone thick, and the fingers had started to drift sideways. She opened jars with a rubber square and never mentioned it, and she still did 4 mornings a week in a school cafeteria because the numbers didn't work otherwise. She'd come home, lower herself into the chair in stages, and joke that lunch ladies had better benefits than most executives. The radiator worked when it felt like working. Most nights, it clanked twice and went cold. Evan would walk in and find his mother in a winter coat in her own living room, both hands wrapped around a mug for the warmth coming off it. He'd say he'd call the landlord again. She'd say, "Don't waste your minutes." He never picks up. That was the part that got under his skin, not the empty account. It was standing in the shower at 10 at night, with his forearms still twitching, knowing tomorrow wanted the exact same thing out of him. Every night ran the same. Eat something straight out of the pan. Scroll until his eyes burned. Promise himself tomorrow would look different. By Thursday, he couldn't remember what he'd promised himself on Monday. Mason's regulars were small contractors, 4 men, 6 men, guys who owned 2 ladders and a reputation. The big orders were never the problem. It was the $10 junk that shut a job down. A box of screws in the wrong length, a snapped blade, a spool of wire 40 feet short, an adhesive the whole county was out of. Evan once watched a plumber lose most of a morning over an $18 valve. 6 guys at $35, $40 an hour once you count what the boss actually pays out. Work that on the back of a receipt at the counter, and half a morning of standing around comes to about $900. More if there's a lift sitting there on rent. All because one small part didn't show up. The big distributors delivered. Sure, 8 to 4. That's the window they'll give you. So if your guys start at 6:30, your material might arrive when half the day is already spent. Evan heard some version of that complaint every week of his life. He'd nod, apologize for the warehouse, and go back to counting boxes. He never once heard it as an opening. It filed itself in his head under the same heading as the weather. Not my problem. Miguel Alvarez came in on a Thursday afternoon for an order that had been short-shipped twice. He was in his 60s, built like a man who used to carry things for a living, and there was a hitch in his right leg. He'd run a renovation outfit for 20-odd years until a scaffold plank let go and his knee took the whole drop. Retired now, mostly. He was only buying material because his daughter had a rental with a bathroom that hadn't been touched since the 80s, and he wasn't the type to hire that out. Evan helped him recount the boxes in the bay. Miguel watched him work for a while. "How long you been here?" "Almost 6 years." "And how much longer are you planning on it?" Evan gave the answer he always gave. No time, no money for school, rent's due, mom's medication's due, and there's only so many hours in a day. Miguel leaned on the pallet jack and let that sit. "You've got the hours, son. It's just that every one of them already belongs to somebody else." He didn't launch into a speech about millionaires and morning routines. He said one more thing on his way to the truck, and he said it the way you'd read off a part number. "Keep 1 hour. Before the phone, before your boss, before anybody's got a claim on you. And don't use it to do more. Use it to see straight." Evan set the alarm for 5 the next morning. He lasted 3 days. On the 4th, he swiped it away and slept until his usual time, and there was nothing mysterious about why. He was still going to bed near midnight with a phone in his hand. He wasn't gaining an hour. He was stealing it from the wrong end of the night, so he changed the night first. Phone off at 9, lights out by 9:45, work clothes over the chair, lunch already made, and the block from 5 to 6:15 got exactly one assignment, chosen the evening before, written on the back of a receipt. The first thing that changed wasn't his income. It was that he got into bed at 9:45, 11 nights running, which he hadn't done since high school. For 3 weeks, he didn't start anything. He just wrote. Which items went short most often? Which crews rolled onto site at 6 or 7 instead of 8? What a stalled morning actually cost in real dollars? Which suppliers unlocked early for trade accounts? What could ride safely in the bed of a half-ton? How far apart the active sites really were. Once he stopped guessing and mapped them on paper, then he started reaching out. He stayed away from Mason's customer records. He used public business numbers, contractor websites, and the job site contacts companies posted for early crews. He sent a short text first, explaining who he was and asking whether they would take a 90-second call before work. 20 contractors over 6 mornings. Most never answered. 2 ended the call before he finished the first sentence. 1 asked whether it was a sales pitch, decided that it was, and hung up without waiting for Evan to respond. 4 let him finish. One of them said it like he'd been waiting his whole career for somebody to ask. "I paid 6 men to sit on a tailgate for 2 hours last month because we were missing 1 masonry bit. $60? I'd have handed it over before you finished the sentence. The fourth yes was a project manager named Nadia Brooks. She didn't promise him a job. "Put your number in my phone," she said. "One of these mornings I'm going to need you. That's when I'll find out whether you're real." That was the week it clicked. Cheap parts caused expensive delays, and none of the distributors Evan knew was built to solve that problem before a shift began. Nadia called 11 days later. At 5:38 on a Tuesday, 8 men were reporting to a duplex rehab at 7. 2 boxes of concrete anchors should have been on the contractor's truck Friday, and they weren't. Evan bought the exact anchors from a wholesale yard on Delaney that opened its trade counter at 4:30. He kept the supplier's receipt exactly as printed and added a $40 delivery charge. The contractor reimbursed the anchors at cost. After fuel and the card processing fee, $22 of Evan's delivery charge remained. $22 changes nobody's life, but it was the first money he'd ever earned from a decision of his own instead of another hour somebody else had scheduled. He clocked in at Mason at 7:29 with the cash folded in his back pocket. That night, he opened a separate savings account online, moved every cent across, and wrote 3 words on the back of the first receipt he placed in the drawer. First hour delivery. Before accepting a second paid run, he called his insurer and explained exactly what he was doing. The commercial use endorsement cost more than he expected and took most of the profit from his next few deliveries. He bought it anyway, $22, a separate account, and a name written on a deposit slip. That was the whole operation. For 3 months, he only ran between 5:30 and 7, plus weekends. He didn't touch Mason's customer list. He didn't use their vehicles. He never used his employee discount because he'd seen exactly how that story ended for somebody in shipping the year before. He bought like any other customer and kept every receipt in a shoebox that eventually graduated to a filing case. When the income became steady enough to be worth protecting, he did the unglamorous work. He registered the LLC. He took the paperwork to the credit union and opened an actual business account. He replaced the temporary insurance endorsement with commercial auto and general liability coverage. He hired a bookkeeper by the hour. He opened trade accounts with 2 suppliers and paid both balances early, even during months when waiting until the due date would have been easier. He wrote real terms, what the delivery fee covered, what a delivery window meant, who carried the loss if a box was damaged in transit. He drew a hard line at hazardous chemicals and anything beyond his truck's rating. 6 months after the first run, he had 9 regular clients. Around $3,600 a month was coming in, and roughly $1,500 remained after fuel, insurance, material handling, taxes, and the other costs that hadn't existed when the business was only an idea. Still not enough to quit. He didn't pretend otherwise. Then he started spending sleep like it was free. More runs meant more money, so he kept saying yes. Deliveries before dawn, 8 to 10 hours on the warehouse floor, invoices at the kitchen table until 11, 4.5 hours of sleep on a good night. He'd read the same line on an invoice 3 times and think the problem was the invoice. One morning on Halstead, a kid came off the curb on a bicycle. Evan hit the brakes hard enough to send a box of fittings into the back of the cab. The truck stopped maybe 4 feet short of him. No contact, no police report, nothing anybody else would have called an accident. Evan pulled into an empty lot and sat there for 10 minutes because his hands wouldn't hold the wheel steady. He told Miguel about it that Saturday. Miguel listened until Evan finished. "How much sleep did you get the night before?" 4 hours, maybe 4.5. Miguel looked at him for a moment. "Then what did you think was going to happen?" That was all he said. Evan went home and cut the schedule. He raised the rate on anything beyond the ring road. He stopped accepting runs that didn't clear a real margin, even when turning them down felt like throwing money away. He grouped clients into fixed loops, so one route covered 4 stops instead of 2, and he gave up 1 morning a week to deliver nothing at all. That hour went to the numbers, what came in, what went out, which clients created the most emergencies, and where his time was disappearing without producing any profit. He wrote the new rate on the back of the old price sheet and taped it inside the cab where he'd have to look at it every morning. Mason found out. Of course they did. Somebody saw Evan's pickup outside a site at 6 in the morning with a magnetic first hour sign on the door. The branch manager called him into the office before lunch. Evan brought the receipts before anyone asked. He showed that he hadn't taken a customer list, used an employee discount, touched a company vehicle, or charged a delivery through Mason's account. The manager believed him. It still didn't solve the problem. Mason was preparing to pilot its own early delivery service. A receiving clerk operating a construction courier business was a conflict on paper, and paper was what HR was going to use. They gave him 2 choices. He could close first hour and keep his position, or submit his resignation. Evan's pride wanted him to empty the locker that afternoon and enjoy the feeling for about 90 minutes. He didn't. He went home and ran the numbers at the kitchen table. First hour was replacing roughly 70% of his Mason income. He had 4 months of living expenses saved and 3 clients willing to sign recurring delivery agreements. The numbers said he could leave. They did not say he could leave carelessly. The next morning, Evan submitted a 6-week notice. The branch manager agreed to the transition on 3 conditions. Evan would stop accepting new work from anyone who bought through the branch. He would use no Mason property or information, and every outside delivery had to remain completely outside his scheduled hours. Evan accepted. For 6 weeks, he took no new local accounts. He trained the receiving clerk replacing him, relabeled the shelving, and wrote down every supplier quirk that had previously lived only in his head. He left on good terms with a dock crew that had covered for him for 6 years. Miguel pointed out the problem waiting on the other side. Everything you know came from standing at that counter. Once you leave, the counter stops talking to you. He was right, so Evan built another way to listen. After every delivery, he asked the foreman for 90 seconds. What ran out this week? What was coming up? What almost stopped the job? What had the supplier promised that still hadn't arrived? He kept the answers in the same notebook. When Evan handed in his notice, the final date had not come from courage or anger. It had come from a spreadsheet. Full-time, he landed the morning material runs for 6 of Nadia's sites. He bought a used box truck for $14,500, put $5,000 down from the emergency fund, and financed the rest through the credit union at a rate that made him wince. Then he hired Jaden. Jaden was 21, a kid from the same warehouse floor, with a newborn at home and a driving record cleaner than Evan's. He knew how to load a truck, how to secure material, and how quickly a calm morning could turn into an expensive one. At the end of Jaden's first day, Evan sat alone in the cab and understood that somebody else's rent now depended on how well he planned the week. 2 weeks later, when he processed Jaden's first payroll, the feeling became real. Then clients began asking first hour to front the material and invoice them at the end of the month. Evan said yes, because the larger accounts wanted 1 bill instead of 12 receipts. Every yes moved another few $100s out of the bank and into boxes riding around in a truck. He saw the business account falling. What he failed to understand was that money owed to him was not the same as money available to him. On his spreadsheet, the invoices looked like assets. At the fuel pump and the payroll screen, they were useless until somebody paid them. By December, nearly the entire emergency cushion had become unpaid customer balances and inventory. Evan had watched every dollar leave. He had simply given the loss a more comfortable name. Which brings us back to Fourth and Mercer. The fuel pump may have been bad luck. Everything the failure exposed belonged to Evan. The box truck was dead, 11 miles from Rayburn. The old pickup was already committed to a full route. 3 shrink-wrapped pallets sat inside the box truck, each too heavy to move safely by hand on an icy shoulder. There was no spare vehicle, no liftgate truck on standby, and no agreement with another carrier. Every supplier contact, gate code, customer number, and route change still had to pass through Evan. He had built 2 working routes and mistaken them for a resilient company. Standing in the sleet, he called Jaden first. Jaden could abandon his route and come east, but the pickup could carry only a fraction of Evan's load. 2 other crews would lose their material, and they still had no safe way to transfer the pallets at the roadside. Evan called 3 rental companies. 2 were closed. The third had cargo vans available at 7. Nothing with a liftgate before then. He called 2 local hotshot carriers. One driver was already headed out of the county. The other had a truck, but no way to unload the pallets at the intersection. He called the Rayburn contractor and asked whether they had a flatbed and forklift available. The forklift was already at another site. 18 minutes disappeared, while Evan proved to himself that there was no clean rescue. Then he called every client. He didn't blame the weather, the truck, or the repair shop that had serviced it in August. He gave them the plain version. "My truck is down at 4th and Mercer. Your material is secure. Here is the earliest time I can honestly get it to you." The Rayburn crew, all 14 of them, lost a little over 3 hours. The contractor pulled them onto demolition work scheduled for Thursday just to keep their hands moving. At 9, he called Evan and ended the contract in under a minute. He wasn't cruel about it. "You're running every route at full capacity, Evan. I can't build my schedule on a company with no backup." Jaden completed his first delivery, then abandoned the rest of his planned loop and picked up replacement material for the second site directly from a supplier. That crew lost about 90 minutes instead of the entire morning. The third contractor had enough material to resequence the work. They accepted their original load after the disabled truck was towed to a yard and transferred later that morning. By Friday, the breakdown had cost Evan just under $4,000. The tow and fuel pump repair came to $1,100. A 6-day emergency rental at walk-up rates cost $900. Refunded delivery fees and a partial labor credit to the second site took another $600. The rest was revenue he never earned because he spent 3 days managing one failure instead of running the business. For 2 days, Evan kept the Mason branch number open on his phone. He considered selling the truck, closing the LLC, and asking for his old position back. He kept hearing his uncle at Thanksgiving asking how the little truck thing was coming along. Nadia stayed. When Evan called to apologize a second time, she interrupted him. "You made us late." "That's true, and it cost me. You also called before I had to chase you. You refunded the fee, and you didn't disappear for a week. I don't need somebody who never makes a mistake. I've never met that person in 19 years. I need somebody who tells me the truth and fixes what he can." Miguel didn't offer him a loan. He bought Evan coffee, listened to the whole story, and asked one question. "Do you want a job that stops every time you stop, or a company that can keep moving without you?" Evan had been reading the breakdown as proof that he wasn't built for the business. When he laid out every charge, every lost hour, and every phone call, he saw something else. A fuel pump could fail in any truck. One failed part should not have been able to stop every route, empty the bank account, and place every client relationship in the hands of one exhausted person. Getting up at 4 instead of 5 would not have saved the fuel pump. A better system might have saved everything around it. The rebuild began with a problem no checklist could solve. Evan needed cash before Friday. He called Nadia and 2 recurring clients with invoices still inside 30-day terms. He offered a small discount for immediate payment. Nadia agreed. The other 2 followed. It did not erase the loss. It covered payroll, the repair balance, and enough fuel to keep both routes moving. Only after those invoices cleared did Evan begin moving 6% of every completed job into a reserve account before paying himself. He signed emergency use agreements with 2 fleet providers. The paperwork and payment authorization stayed on file, but First Hour paid nothing until a replacement was activated. Both kept vehicles at 24-hour yards and committed to availability within 90 minutes. He also made a swap agreement with Bell Courier, a 2-van operation nearby. First Hour would cover Bell's early runs when Bell was short. Bell would cover First Hour's overflow. Neither would solicit the other's clients. Jaden began learning order intake and customer calls instead of only driving. Every vehicle got an end-of-night walk-around, mileage-based service intervals, and a procedure for reporting changes in starting, idling, braking, or fuel pressure. 3 weeks into the rebuild, Evan was still sleeping 4 hours a night and trying to replace the lost Rayburn account. A contractor sent an order for exterior wedge anchors with the manufacturer, SKU, size, and approved finish. At the supplier, a will call clerk staged the wrong box. The hot dip galvanized anchors and the zinc-plated version sat on adjacent shelves in nearly identical packaging. The finish code differed by 2 characters. First Hour's pickup process still depended on the driver reading the label correctly. There was no required scan, no confirmation photograph, and no second check from dispatch. Jaden matched the product name, size, and quantity, loaded the box, and left without comparing the full code to the digital order. The crew couldn't use the anchors outside. They lost 3 hours while First Hour corrected the delivery. Evan came apart on Jaden in front of the foreman. He raised his voice and waved the box around, as though Jaden had chosen to embarrass him. Jaden pulled off his gloves and set them on the tailgate. You knew which 2 characters mattered. You never trained me to look for them. Then he drove home. Evan went home too, and told Linda that Jaden had been careless. She let him finish. Then she asked, "What did you tell him to check before he left?" Evan started to answer, and realized the answer was nothing specific. The customer had ordered the right product. The purchase order carried the right SKU. The supplier had staged the wrong box, and Jaden had failed to catch it. But Evan had built a process in which catching it depended on knowledge that still lived inside his head. He drove to Jaden's apartment. The baby was crying behind the door when Evan apologized. He didn't blame the supplier. He told Jaden what he had failed to build and offered him a new position, operations coordinator, with a raise attached. They rebuilt the pickup process together. Before dispatch, the supplier had to confirm the staged SKU. At pickup, the driver scanned the barcode against the digital order. Structural and exterior materials received a confirmation photograph. Orders above $500 and anything carrying load or requiring an approved finish received a second check from dispatch. Any mismatch stopped the truck before it moved. The lesson wasn't that Jaden should have known everything Evan knew. It was that expertise, trapped in one person's head, was not a system. Over the next 2 months, Evan completed the rest of the rebuild. First Hour expanded its trade accounts from 2 suppliers to 4. 2 had night managers willing to release a confirmed will call order to an account in good standing. The company adopted ordinary routing software instead of the custom application somebody had quoted at $11,000. Material was photographed at pickup and again at delivery, with timestamps attached to the order. 6 weeks of operating expenses stayed in cash. Customer invoices and inventory were tracked separately from the reserve. Evan could see exactly how much money was available before accepting another job that required first hour to front the material. Revenue stayed almost flat for the next 2 quarters. Nothing broke badly enough to stop the company. For the first time, Evan understood that flat revenue and a stable operation could still be progress. During those flat quarters, Linda kept working 4 mornings a week in the school cafeteria. Evan offered to replace every dollar of her paycheck so she could stop. She turned him down. "I've spent too many years earning my own money to quit because your company had 2 decent months." He didn't argue. 4 months later, her hands stopped giving her a choice. One morning, she couldn't keep her grip on the metal tray rail. She stood in the cafeteria parking lot for 10 minutes before calling Evan to say she'd given notice. She sounded like someone confessing to a failure. Evan listened until she finished. Then he told her the company had already survived months worse than the paycheck she was giving up, and that nothing in the business mattered more than making sure she didn't have to destroy her hands to keep the heat on. Linda still made him show her the numbers before she agreed. Northline, a distributor with its own fleet, rolled out a pre-shift delivery program. The service looked a lot like First Hour from the outside. Northline could bundle early delivery into pallet orders at a price Evan couldn't match. Its trucks were already paid for by lumber, drywall, and container volume purchases. First Hour had to earn its margin from delivery. For 3 weeks, Evan tried to compete. He lowered fees, accepted routes farther apart, and watched the numbers get worse. Then he called his 6 best clients and asked why they still used him. Not one said price. They said a human answered before 6. They said First Hour gave them an arrival time instead of an 8-hour window. And when the usual branch was out, Evan did not send a driver around the city hoping to find something. He worked the phone first. 6 years at the counter taught him which branches carried unusual sizes when suppliers restocked, and which night managers would check a shelf instead of trusting yesterday's inventory screen. A vehicle moved only after a supplier confirmed the SKU and quantity, and placed the material under a will call number. That became the business. First Hour stopped trying to become a smaller Northline and became an emergency material support company for retainer clients. The monthly fee paid for pre-shift priority, sourcing, order verification, and a phone answered before the crews started. It did not give clients unlimited use of First Hour's cash. Material above $500 required direct payment, a card authorization, or room inside a pre-approved credit limit. Routine pallets, lumber packages, and scheduled bulk orders stayed with large distributors. Evan recommended Northline for them openly. When the supply chain failed, First Hour found the approved item, confirmed it was waiting, and dispatched a vehicle. Northline kept the planned volume. First Hour handled the expensive exceptions. By the end of the 2nd year after that first $22 run, First Hour had 4 trucks and 9 people on the books. The company was still small enough that Evan knew every driver by the sound of the truck door closing, but it no longer stopped when he took his hands off a single order. 18 months after the breakdown at 4th and Mercer, nearly 3 years after Nadia's first call, a large construction firm contacted First Hour at 4 in the afternoon. A 180-unit complex was midway through renovation. 70 workers were scheduled by the hour the next morning. The contractor's primary distributor had just admitted that a pallet of structural anchors had been routed to a yard 2 states away. If the crews couldn't begin, the contractor expected to lose more than $25,000 in labor, equipment rental, and schedule penalties. Evan spent 40 minutes on the phone before giving them an answer. He first confirmed the exact manufacturer, SKU, diameter, length, finish, and engineering approval listed in the project's submittal. An anchor that looked close was useless if the engineer had not approved it. No single supplier in the metro had the full quantity of that exact product. 2 yards inside the city had about 60% between them. The remaining quantity sat at a branch 110 miles north, and its public counter did not open until 7. Evan could have promised the entire load by 7 and tried to solve the problem on the road. Instead, he told the project manager what the system could honestly deliver. Both city yards had night managers willing to release confirmed will-call orders to accounts in good standing. First Hour had paid those accounts early for more than 2 years. 60% could be on site by 6:40. The northern branch opened at 7. Even with a driver waiting at the gate, the balance would not arrive before 9:30. The contractor would need to start with the 2 buildings already stocked, use the first delivery on the next available section, and move the remaining crews only after the northern load arrived. If First Hour missed either promised time, the entire emergency service fee would be refunded. The project manager was quiet for a moment. "You're the first person today who's given me a number instead of a maybe." Jaden ran dispatch. First Hour kept its existing routes moving and activated 2 vehicles through the priority rental agreements. Bell Courier took the northern leg under the swap arrangement the companies had been using for 18 months. Evan drove to the second city yard himself at 4 in the morning and stood beneath a sodium light while a night manager he'd never met counted the anchors against the approved SCAE. It worked. Nobody needed to improvise a heroic rescue on the highway. The reserve account allowed First Hour to pay 3 suppliers before the contractor's purchasing department opened. The trade accounts opened the gates before dawn. The rental agreements added capacity without sacrificing existing clients. The confirmation photographs caught 1 mislabeled box before it left the counter. The routing software showed dispatch exactly where each load was and which commitment would fail first if a driver lost time. Bell Courier covered the longest leg because Evan had spent 18 months honoring the same agreement when Bell needed help. And the project manager trusted the delivery times because Evan had once called from a dead truck and told the truth before anyone had to chase him. The first 60% reached the site at 6:37. The northern load arrived at 9:24. Nobody stood around that morning. 3 weeks later, First Hour signed a 2-year regional emergency support contract. The contract did not turn 4 trucks into 23 overnight. It gave First Hour a predictable floor of monthly work, enough to plan instead of guessing. Evan used the first 6 months to stabilize the original city. He leased 3 additional vehicles. Only after signed route commitments could cover the payments, insurance, and drivers attached to them. Jaden built a training program around the mistakes they had already paid for: order verification, load security, driving limits, customer calls, and what to do when a promised time could no longer be met. Every new driver spent 2 weeks riding with an experienced one before taking an early route alone. First Hour entered the second city 8 months into the contract. After 3 contractors there agreed to monthly retainers, Evan refused to open a depot until the committed revenue could support a dispatcher, a reserve vehicle, and 6 weeks of operating cash. The third city came the following year. Growth happened 1 route at a time. Some routes were rejected. One city launch was delayed by 4 months because the numbers did not support a backup vehicle. The regional contract gave First Hour credibility, but it was not the company's only customer. The case study from the anchor delivery brought in renovation firms, mechanical contractors, and 2 distributors that needed overflow coverage without building another pre-shift route of their own. By the end of the 2-year agreement, First Hour had 23 vehicles, 38 employees, and operations in 3 cities. Annual revenue was just under $5 million on a modest, honest margin. The morning operation no longer required Evan to touch a single order. Evan did not have $1 million sitting in a bank account. He never had. Most of what he owned existed in less dramatic forms: his equity in First Hour, the index fund he had contributed to every month since the second truck, and the equity in a modest house he'd bought after the company's third profitable year. His net worth crossed 7 figures sometime during the 6th year. His accountant mentioned it during a Tuesday review, halfway between a question about vehicle depreciation and another about the new depot lease. Evan looked at the page, said, "Huh," and went back to the operating report. He had stopped checking for the number. It arrived while he was measuring other things. He bought Linda a small single-story place on the north side, 2 bedrooms, a short, level walk from the driveway to the door, no steps for knees that had stopped negotiating with stairs years earlier. The insulation was good. The furnace came on the first time you asked it to. She cried in the kitchen on the first cold night, and it had nothing to do with the house. She cried because she reached over, turned the dial up to 72, and didn't do the math first. Miguel came by the new depot with his cane and his opinions. Evan walked him through dispatch, the route boards, the on-time percentages, and the drivers coming off the early loop, with coffee going cold in their hands. "You taught me to get up at 5, Evan said. Miguel shook his head. "No, I didn't. I told you to keep 1 hour. What you did with it was your business." Behind the glass, dispatch was preparing the next shift. Some first-hour drivers started at 3:30 in the morning because the customers on their routes needed material before 6. Others didn't clock in until 10. Nobody was assigned an early shift as a test of loyalty. Early route drivers finished earlier, had firm limits on driving hours, and were not placed on late work the night before. A person could choose the shift that fitted his life, but once he was behind the wheel, the company did not ask tiredness to compete with a deadline. The schedule was built around when customers needed the material and how long a person could drive safely. The hour had never been about proving who wanted success badly enough. It was supposed to create enough distance to see what the work was doing to the people inside it. The next morning, Evan woke at 5 out of habit. He didn't reach for the phone. He sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, the same way he had 6 years earlier. The handwriting was worse now. The coffee was considerably better. He wasn't writing about how to climb out of a hole. He was sketching a training program for young drivers, a plan to bring the incident rate down, and a way to grow the company without quietly wrecking the lives of the people inside it. Outside, the city was still dark. 2 miles away, First Hour's earliest drivers were halfway through the first loop. Across town, the lights were already on at the old Mason warehouse. Somebody was salting the loading yard before the morning trucks arrived. It had been happening every morning Evan had ever been awake to see it. The city had not changed its schedule for him. He had simply learned how to stop giving all of his hours away before deciding what any of them were for. Evan turned the page. He kept writing until the window went gray.